The views and opinions expressed by the guests of the Inspira Podcast do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of any agency of the United States government or any organization, public or private.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Inspira Podcast, hosted by your girl, me, Erika Mueller Chen. I'm an international development specialist with over a decade of experience leveraging the amazing power of sport to promote peace and positive social impact. My career has allowed me to live in Europe, Southern Africa, and Latin America. In 2022, I accepted an offer for my dream job in sports diplomacy. And I also became an employee family member to a U.S. diplomat, aka an EFM. This podcast is all about inspiration and career advice. Each episode, I'll interview an inspirational global changemaker working in sport for development, social impact, or the diplomatic service. This series is perfect if you have interest in breaking into one of these sectors, or you've already landed that dream role and are keen to learn from thought leaders. Enjoy today's episode and stay inspired. Welcome, friends. This is a special Inspira Podcast episode 1 and will be a bit different than the other episodes. Today, I would love to introduce you to the podcast and to the host, me. My name is Erika Mueller Chen, and I have a deep passion for unique catalysts of education and social change. My career has focused on how to use sport as that catalyst for positive change. Rewinding quite a bit, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest of the United States in a tiny town called Steilacoom, Washington. I loved sports and earned the privilege of playing Division I softball at the Ivy League institution Brown University. During one summer break from university, I was recovering from shoulder surgery and decided to spend my time conducting 400 informational phone interviews. Yes, 400, with folks working in the sports industry. Through these conversations, it was really the first time I had ever heard about the existence of sport for social change, also known to some as sport for good, or what I will refer to it as sport for development. This idea that sport can have a greater purpose than just athletic performance. Sport for development specifically refers to the intentional use of sport, physical activity, and play to reach specific development and peace objectives. In the years to follow, I went on to collect professional experiences in the sport for development sector. I worked in London during the 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games with an organization that hosts global summits to celebrate the use of sport to address social issues. I worked in the Western Cape of South Africa in a small fisherman's village called Hansby with a Barclays Spaces for Sport site that used sport as a vehicle to promote social integration across 3 racially divided townships. I worked for a Paralympic NGO, which allowed me to travel to Brazil and Turkey in order to design and implement train-the-trainer curriculums to empower individuals with disabilities. And most recently, I worked for the United States Peace Corps for 5 wonderful years, supporting its mission to promote world peace and friendship. So, what about my professional path is not already visible to you on LinkedIn? A few things. In London, I learned that there are existing champions in sport for development, but Sometimes there's a gap when it comes to discussing failures or even including leaders at the ground level, aka practitioners, in key conversations. In South Africa, it became clear to me that a hope to do good and actually doing good are not one and the same. Also, thankfully, I realized how important it is to critically consider my own identity as a white American woman, especially in spaces where I am an outsider. With the Paralympics, it was incredible to have the opportunity to engage with and adapt to different cultures each month, where sport was the constant. It was also an important learning experience for me to be immersed into adaptive sport. Finally, each of the organizations I've worked for functioned at what I consider to be a different distance to the ground or to impact. This variety was helpful for me to better understand how organizations and funders approach social impact in their own unique ways. Another key piece of my journey has centered on extracurricular activities in sport for development. As a volunteer, I managed a USAID Sport for Development Monitoring and Evaluation Learning Lab. I was also the managing editor for the Journal of Sport for Development, which is the first open access research journal dedicated to advancing evidence in sport for development. Further, while living in Washington, D.C., I teamed up with other sport for development enthusiasts to host regular meetups to promote relationship building in the sector. Each of these extracurricular experiences have provided value to me, may it be through gaining knowledge or establishing relationships. My education has also been paramount to my growth. I earned my executive MBA from IE Business School in Madrid, Spain. I had observed how private sector insights and skills were not always present in the development conversation, and I myself was staying open to the possibility of moving from the public sector to the private sector. I'm happy to go in depth on any of these experiences in a future one-to-one conversation or even another podcast episode, if there's interest. So, what's next for me? In 2023, I'll start a new position working in the sports diplomacy division at the U.S. Department of State, overseeing their sports envoy portfolio. This really is a dream job. At the time of recording this intro episode, I have not yet started that role, and it shall not influence my first year of the podcast, well, because I've already recorded the episodes. Now, a little bit more about this podcast, my motivation, and who I think should listen. As you may know by now, informational interviews have been invaluable in my learning about career realities, especially for a lesser known sector such as sport for development. I also recognize that not everybody has the access or even comfort to request or secure these types of conversations. Thus, my podcast idea was born, with the hopes that I can record conversations with leaders around the world, give these leaders a platform to tell their own story, and hopefully through these conversations, offer insights and inspiration to my audience and folks who aspire to be like these leaders. I feel this podcast will be particularly useful for early career professionals. I also hope that with the global focus and expertise that my guests bring, I can also see high-level career professionals taking a real interest in these conversations and it perhaps opening them up to insights from corners of the world that they may not hear from every day. In 2023, the podcast will really lean into sport for development. I'll bring you 50 interviews with folks from over 35 different countries. Leaders from organizations including FC Barcelona, Women Win, Soccer Without Borders, Laureus, Unisports Hub, the Center for Healing and Justice Through Sport, GIZ, and many, many more. In addition to geographic and gender diversity, I also hope to bring you diverse perspectives from practitioners and researchers, as well as emerging voices in these spaces, including several IOC young leaders. I'm so excited for what is to come with the Inspira podcast. I've also kept it flexible by naming it Inspira so that I can have conversations with all leaders who inspire me, inside and outside of sport for development and peace. A bit of a personal note here, and something for the State Department audience out there. I am married to a U.S. diplomat, making me what the service calls an EFM, or a family member. We are currently based in Guadalajara, Mexico, and in 2023, we will be moving to Vancouver, Canada. While podcast episodes in 2023 will focus on sport for development, I am staying open to the future potential of interviews with leaders in the diplomatic service. I hope you consider joining me on this podcast journey, and I hope that here you may find inspiration.